you should have gotten if you tried it. Number 1 was a positive 1 and a negative 9. Number 2, you should have gotten either one of those is acceptable. Plus or minus square root of 7 plus 1, or you could have reversed the order. 1 plus or minus square root of 7. And then number 3, either one of those is acceptable. Plus or minus I square root of 11 plus 5, or just reverse. Okay, so I'm not going to go over those 3 because the people who did them, like, I don't want to sit here and go over all 3 when they did them last night, but I am going to go over some on the next page so that we can practice this some more. After I've gone over a few on the next page, we're going to move on to the review sheet for the test. Okay, so has everybody checked their answers? Okay, we're trying to solve this using the complete the square method. Now, you could possibly solve this a different way. Don't write this down. I'm just going to show you that you could solve it by factoring, possibly. Let's see. Are there 2 numbers that multiply to give you a negative 21 and also add to give you a positive 4? Right, a positive 7 and a negative 3. Remember, don't write this down because we're going to have to do it by completing the square. I'm just showing you that there are several ways to solve the same problem. Okay, then at that point, wouldn't you just have set this one to 0, set this one equal to 0, subtracted 7, subtracted 7, and you would have ended up with negative 7 as one solution. Over here, you would have added 3, and ended up with positive 3 as the second solution. But that's solving it by factoring. Not all of these, though, can be solved by factoring. So yesterday, we practiced solving it with a different method called quadratic formula. Okay, remember in that one, we would have identified the A, B, and C. What's the A for this one? Don't write this down either. 1, what's the B? And what's the C? Right? And then you would have plugged them in the quadratic formula. So that would have been negative B plus or minus the square root of B squared minus 4AC all over 2A. Okay, what goes in the B places? What goes in the A places? And what goes in the C place? Then you would have typed this in. Go ahead and type in the discriminant in your calculator. That 4 squared minus 4 times 1 times negative 21. Okay, what do you get for the discriminant?
100.
100? Shh. Hold on 1 second. So look, shh. When you typed in the discriminant, which is everything, oops, too big, which is everything up under the radical, you all told me that that made a 100. Okay? Well then, when you take the square root of 100, what do you get? A 10. So I'm just rewriting it because there's not much room here. Okay, so now I have a negative 4 plus or minus 10 over 2, basically. So negative 4 can go over the 2, plus or minus 10 can also go over the 2. Okay, what does that simplify to? A negative 2. So you have a negative 2 plus or minus, what does that simplify to? Okay, so that's 2 different answers because this is 2 different signs. What's negative 2 plus 5? 3. And what's negative 2 minus 5? Negative 7. Isn't that the same answers we just got a while ago when we did it by factoring? Okay, so that's the second way to solve these. Now, moving on to the way that we're learning now. That's the quadratic formula, but on this worksheet, they're not wanting you to solve it with that method. Yeah, that's why I'm telling you, it's nice whole number solutions. If you were to graph that, x squared plus 4x minus 21, where does it cross the x-axis? Right, positive 3 and negative 7. So that's another way of finding your solutions, but that one only works when they're nice whole numbers. Okay, now another way is what we started learning yesterday. It's called complete the square. What was the first step for complete the square? Correct. The constant value, which is the negative 21 in this case, has to constant to the right side of the equation. To get it over there, how do you move it, D'Orlando? How do you move your constant to the right side of the equation? Add it. Add 21, add 21. So now you have x squared plus 4x equals 21. Now that it's in the correct form for complete the square, what was the next step?
Add the blanks.
Right, add the blanks. Okay, now there is a formula that will tell you what to put in those blanks. Does anybody remember it? Right, b divided by 2 squared is the formula for the blanks. So, Kiara Watson, what is our b? What's in the b place? Well, just 4, remember, just the numbers. So 4 divided by 2 is, 2 squared is 4. So both of your blanks get filled with a 4. Okay, what was the next step? Factor. Now, one thing you'll start to notice when you factor these, anytime you're doing complete the square and you get ready to factor, your factors are going to be identical. What numbers multiply to 4 and add to 4? A positive 2 and a positive 2. See how those are identical? They'll always be identical when you're doing complete the square. The reason for that is because the very next step, they want you to write it once and square it. That's called write it as a binomial squared. And if they weren't identical, could you do that? No. Now on the right side, that just becomes 25. Okay, from here, you kind of can not even know the steps and know where to go. Because if our whole goal is to get x by itself, doesn't that mean that 2's got to go somewhere else and the square?
Correct.
Which one has to go first? Right, and how do you get rid of a square? Right, they're inverse operations, they cancel each other out. Leaving x plus 2 by itself like we wanted. And then on this side it equals but plus or minus 5. The reason it's plus or minus is because isn't a positive 5 squared 25? But isn't a negative 5 squared also a positive 25? Now to solve for x, the remaining step is to do what? Subtract 2, subtract 2. So you end up with a positive 5 minus 2, which is 3, and a negative 5 minus 2, which is negative 7. Isn't that the same solutions we got when we factored, quadratic formula, and graphed? It is, and on the test, you're not even going to have to completely finish it. It's just going to kind of list a couple of steps and ask you what the next step is. Okay, now remember, the plus or minus is so important, because had you not put it there, wouldn't you have just ended up with 5 minus 2, which is 3, and you wouldn't have the second solution? And we know there has to be 2 solutions because we're dealing with a quadratic equation. The highest exponent is 2. That means you have 2 answers. Okay, so now why don't you get a head start on number 5 while other people are finishing copying that. Number 5, what's step 1 for complete the square?
X squared plus 2x.
Right, it's already done. The C's already on the right side. So what's step 2?
X plus 1 is
Add the blanks. What's the formula for the blanks?
1.
B over 2 squared. What is the B? When you divide that by 2 you get, and when you square that you get 1. 1 squared is 1. Yes. Okay, now what's the next step? Factor, and what do you know about these factors?
5 plus 1 equals
There, well, yeah, we could go ahead and make that a 6, but what do we know about the factors every time? They're going to be the same. So you're looking for 2 numbers that multiply to 1 and add to 2. Right. Now, the reason they have to be the same is because in the next step, you're going to write it as a binomial squared, which means write it once, but square. And you can't do that unless they're the same. Now, from here, we're just trying to get x by itself. So the first step to get this x by itself is what? Square rooted to cancel out the power of 2. So now x plus 1 is right there because everything else canceled out. But you have to also square root this side. Anytime you're solving for x and you square root, you have to put a plus or minus on your answer. Now, the square root of 6 is not a perfect square, and it Because think about it. If you tried to factor tree it, there'd be no pairs to circle. Everything would go back in the house, so you just leave it. Now the remaining step to get x by itself is what? Subtract 1, subtract 1. So your answers are positive square root of 6 minus 1 and negative square root of 6 minus 1. No, that doesn't mean it's complex. Those are real numbers. It would have only been I had there been a negative up under the radical. No, it's a positive 6. Now let me show you something else. I know those aren't nice whole numbers, but watch this if I graph it. To graph it, I got to put the 5 back over. So x squared plus 2x. To put the 5 back over means I need to do what? Right, plus 2x minus 5. Now, how many times does this graph cross the x-axis? Twice. Okay, so it has real solutions. That's why there's no I in our answer. Now, watch me type in these real solutions one at a time. If I type in the square root of 6 minus 1, oops, I didn't go out from under. You got to arrow over to get out from under, and then minus 1, I get that, 1.45 basically. If I type in the negative square root of 6 minus 1, I get that. So about negative 1.45 and negative 3.45. Now let's look back at the graph. Doesn't that look about 1.45? And doesn't that look like about negative 3.45? So you can still check, and once you get your answer, you can graph it, type them in, see what the decimals are, and check it. I know that's not something you're going to do on a daily basis with daily work, but on a test, I would. Okay? All right. Number 6. What do I need to do first? Right. Step 1 has already been done. Your constant is already on this side. So I'm ready to add the blanks to each side. Okay, what is the formula for the blanks? Right. What is the b value? 2. When you divide it by 2, you get, and when you square 1, you get 1. So look, that's the same trinomial we just had. So we already know the factors are x plus 1 and x plus 1. But this time it's equal to what? Negative 4. Now, when you write it as a binomial squared, the left side's going to look the same as the previous problem, right? But on the right side, we have a negative 4, so now look, when we square root it, those cancel, leaving x plus 1, but what happens over here? Right, plus or minus 2, because the square root of 4 is 2, but since it's negative, it's complex. You put an I. Now the remaining step is subtract that 1 on both sides, and so your answer is plus or minus 2i minus 1. Because the number up under the radical was negative this time. Over here it was positive. Okay, now I'm going to graph this and show you what it would look like. Y equals x squared plus 2x, but this time it'll be plus 5 at the end, right? Does it cross the x-axis? No, because you have a complex number for your answer. Okay, Anna, what do I do first? Kennedy, go sit down. Okay. Squared. Right. The what? The factors. So you're telling me 9 times 9 is 9? And 9 plus 9 is 6? X plus 3 and x plus 3. Because 3 times 3 is 9, 3 plus 3 is 6. Okay, what'd you get on the right side? Okay, now that you see that the factors are x plus 3, what do we need to write next? Right? Shh, guys, you should not be talking right now. Shh. You're right about that. It will be a decimal, and it will not be a perfect square. However, We can simplify it by doing 4, 3, 2, 2, and 3. Circle, kill 1, 2, kick out 1, 2, put the 3 back inside. Now the remaining step is to subtract that 3 from both sides. So your answer is plus or minus 2 square roots of 3 minus 3. Number 1, x squared equals negative 25. The directions say to solve each equation by taking square roots. Anytime you see the word solve and you have a variable, you're trying to get that variable by itself. Why is x not by itself? How do you get rid of that square? Square root it. If you square root this side, you have to square root this side. Those cancel out, leaving x by itself. What's the square root of 25? But since it's negative, and since you're solving,
It's plus and minus.
plus or minus, isn't that a positive 5i and a negative 5i?
So it's
Right. Okay, you go ahead and try number 2 by yourself. The video, what should you do first? Right? And then you get x squared equals what? Now to get x by itself, Kiara, what do you do? Cinco. Square root it. Now, let me go ahead and talk about something. If it's x squared, you know there's how many answers? This only has one answer, and that only has one answer.
It's A.
Okay? Well, then you see that those cancel out, and you're left with a plus or minus 4i, because the square root of 16 is 4.
Yeah.
All right, number 3. Moving into something that'll maybe get you quiet. 6 minus 10i over negative 8 minus 10i. Does anybody remember how to do these?
I don't like it.
Right. You're both on the right track. Okay. You are going to multiply the numerator and the denominator by the complex conjugate of the denominator. That means you change the sign of the complex part. So like that negative 8 stays negative 8, but you change that to positive 10i. Same thing down there. Now, to multiply the top, what do you have to do? Foil. Right. When you multiply, I'm going to make myself some scratch paper because this one's obviously going to take some work.
We don't need the F and the L though.
Not on the top. That's for the bottom. 6 times negative 8 is 6 times 10i is negative 10i times negative 8 is positive 80i, and then negative 10i times positive 10i is negative 100i squared. Okay, now I know that there's stuff up there that can be simplified and combined, but I'm not going to worry about it until after I've done the denominator. How do we multiply the denominator? Right. You also foil it, but if you remember from when we did these, the outer and the inner are just going to cancel each other out because the outer would make a negative 80i and the inner would make a positive 80i, and they would cancel out. So for that reason, we can just skip from the first to the last. The first terms produce a 64, and the last terms produce a, right. Now let's start simplifying. What can I do up top? 2a, right. Is there anything else I can do up top? And why is that? Right. I squared equals a negative 1. So a negative 1 sitting beside a negative 100 becomes a positive 100. Right. Now that that's a constant and that's a constant, we can combine those two and make a 52. And then wasn't that a positive 140i? So the numerator becomes that once it's simplified. Then for the denominator, what can we do? Right. A negative 100 times I squared is the same thing as a negative 100 times a negative 1, which becomes a positive 100. And now that it's a constant, it can combine with that 64 and make that. But remember, see how they write their answers split? So you're going to do 52 over 164, and you're going to do 140i over 164. But that doesn't look like any of the answers because why?
You gotta simplify.
Okay. In your calculator, how do you reduce that? Alpha y equals, and over d, 52 over 164. And then it will reduce it for you to 13 over 41.
It's only one that has that.
Right? And so this must be it. Okay, go ahead and try number 4. Go ahead and try number 4. Got it. Shh, be quiet in the front. Number 4. What do we have to multiply the numerator and the denominator by? Negative 8i. When you're doing the complex conjugate, you have to change the sign of the complex part. So in the top, you're just going to have to distribute. Negative 8i times negative 6 is positive 48i. And negative 8i times 2i is negative 16i squared. Now let's do the denominator. What is 8i times negative 8i? Negative 64i squared. Doesn't that negative 16i squared become a positive 16? And then on the bottom, doesn't that become a positive 64? Because I squared equals a negative 1. So a negative 16 times a negative 1 is a positive 16. Now, if you'll notice, on all 4 of your choices, you have your real number written first, then your complex number. So I need to rearrange this and put the 16 in the front and the 48i second. Then they each go over 64, but as you can see, none of those are the answer, so they must be reduced. What does 16 over 64 reduce to? And what is 48 over 64 reduced to? So it's A. All right, number 5. What do they want you to do in number 5? FOIL. So 5 times negative 4 is 5 times negative 5i is negative 25i. Then 6i times negative 4 is, and 6i times negative 5i is negative 30i squared. Okay, right here in the middle, both of those are just something I. So they can be combined to negative 49i. And then what can this negative 30i squared become? A positive 30, which could then be added onto the negative 20 to make a positive 10. And so 10 minus 49i, which is A. Go ahead and try number 6. Shh, what are you supposed to do on number 6, Kiara Watson? What are you supposed to do here? FOIL, right, multiply. 6 times 8 is 48. 6 times negative 2i is negative 12i. Negative 6i times 8 is negative 48i. And negative 6i times negative 2i is positive 12i squared. Those can combine to what? Negative 60i. Okay, that doesn't have an I on it. That doesn't have an I on it. That does. And then the way they got the 36 is because that makes a negative 12, and when you take it away from 48, you get 36. All right. Tomorrow we will pick up with the rest of this review sheet.